Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining me from. My name is Magdi Hanna. I am the CEO of iALM Software. I am happy to be with you this 1 hour or so to share with you how we can use AI to help us not only generate acceptance criteria, but also to elaborate, to derive lots of details about the user story. We all know that the user stories are really brief, and if we thought that requirements are always missing details, ambiguous, not testable, well, guess what? User stories actually happen to be much worse than requirements. Why? Because most agile teams just use a user story that's one line as a someone who wants to do something. Okay, of course, some agile teams provide some details in the description of the user story. When I go to companies to help them with their user stories and how to generate acceptance criteria, how to test them, and so on, I ask if their product owner provides any level of details in the description. And in some cases, they say, yes, we got a one or two paragraphs that describe what the user story is all about. Okay. Other teams would say no. And actually, I got this resistance from many people who are advocates of Scrum and the user stories in general. Actually, I heard this specifically from someone who actually wrote a book on user stories, and he said if we provide lots of details about the user stories, we're defeating the purpose of the discussion that should happen between the agile team and the stakeholders. Honestly, I disagree with that because even if we have some description, that would help the discussion and will help us ask questions. Anyway, so what happens here is that we get a user story and we may or may not get a description, um, details about the user story. But then what I've been doing for many years now, I've been trying to teach agile teams how to ask the right questions about user stories, because to derive more details about a user story, the only way we can do that is by asking the questions, and hopefully the product owner or the business analyst who wrote the user story can answer those questions, right? And based on the answers, guess what? We should all the time be ready to ask follow-up questions. Okay, because every time someone asks a question and they get an answer, if I ask my wife what time we're going to go dinner tonight and she says around 7 o'clock, then I could be quiet and say, okay, 7 o'clock. But I might have some follow-up questions. It says, but remember, we also have to do this before we go. So are we going to have time to do this and that? So now that is a follow-up question, and my wife can answer that. Uh, of course, based on the questions, the answers, the follow-up questions, we get more details. That's the way it is. So I must admit, I couldn't get agile teams to do to come up with lots of questions. If I have normally I have a workshop that has 15, 20 people, okay? And I put out a user story and I say, okay, uh, uh, give me some questions. Pretend that I'm your product owner and ask me some questions that I can answer so that I can give you more details, because eventually they're going to be creating test cases and so on. So I get someone asking one question. I get some people who are not asking any question, and that's it. And the total number of questions I receive about the user story is probably 3, 4 questions. If I answer those 3, 4 questions, then what? We don't have enough details in the user story. So over time, I decided to use AI to help us generating those questions and accepting answers. And based on the answers it receives, it generates some follow-up questions, and potentially uh, it generates some acceptance criteria. So with that being said, let me uh, start the presentation here. Uh, this slide is, although this presentation is actually about only acceptance criteria and how to use AI to generate acceptance criteria, but also I have been teaching people how to use scenarios. And actually, this slide and then the title of this slide happened. I had a different presentation about what a month ago with the title "Using AI to Elaborate on User Stories and Generate Scenarios." And I decided to make this presentation now to show how to create acceptance criteria. But it is still relevant to give you this slide which compares scenarios to acceptance criteria. These are the kind of things we can do with scenarios. When we write scenarios, or at least when I teach people how to write scenarios, we can have positive scenarios, we can have negative scenarios. Negative scenarios are scenarios that represent some abnormal, extreme, uncommon conditions. Okay. Uh, someone is Something happened that we did not anticipate it to happen, like someone got disconnected from the internet, so a user system crashes, whatever. They can also be what I call a shall not do situation. A user is trying to do something that they're not supposed to do, and that would be another kind of scenarios that we need to some people call them edge cases. So to me, edge cases are like that. Invalid data. A user is using invalid data when they're trying to perform a task. Someone is trying, say, to uh, check the status of their order, but they're entering an invalid order number. All the three considered negative scenarios. Positive scenarios are the normal course of actions. Scenarios also have preconditions, or at least I must say, the way I ask people to write scenarios, they have preconditions. What are those preconditions? Preconditions are everything that must be true before the scenario can happen. For example, if you're talking about a scenario where someone is checking into the flight and getting their boarding pass, the kind of thing you do 24 hours before the flight. So in order to check into the flight and get your boarding pass, obviously, there are some preconditions. Um, you must have reservation on the flight. Uh, the flight must be in the future, not in the past. Like if your reservation was yesterday, obviously you should not be able to get a boarding pass, and so on. All these preconditions are useful because they help the test team to write their test cases. Not only that, they also help the developers to write their code. Scenarios also, the way I write them and I teach people how to write them, they have expected behavior, which means simply saying, if this scenario were to happen in production, how do we expect the system to react to it? Those scenarios are those expected behavior are also very powerful because they help the test team come up with test cases, and expected behavior would be the the expected result of those test cases. They also help the development team write the code uh, such that the scenario or the system behaves the way it's supposed to behave. Okay, that's very important. Most importantly, when we write scenarios, whether we do them manually or we let AI write them, uh, AI gives you three factors based on which you can do risk-based testing. The three factors are things like the frequency of occurrence, i.e., how often do we expect the scenario to happen? The impact of failure, which means if that scenario were to fail in production, what do we expect to happen? What would be the impact? And the probability of failure, which means uh, what is the likelihood of this scenario to fail in production. All these three factors together can be used to determine how important that scenario is for testing, not for development, because all scenarios have to be developed. All the code has to be written to handle all scenarios. But testers may not have time to uh, to test every single scenario, so they can decide what to test or what not. And even if those scenarios that are not high risk, they can decide to test them less formally than the other scenarios. So that's why we have formal testing, we have informal testing. Now, about test generation. Of course, we can generate test cases based on scenarios. We can generate test cases based on acceptance criteria. But guess what? Generating test cases based on scenarios is much easier. Why? Because of all these things I'm talking about, scenarios have preconditions, they have expected behavior. So we can use those, again, whether we are creating our test cases manually or we're letting AI generate them, they would be complete test cases. All right. My apology to spend those few minutes talking about scenarios, but I wanted you to know the difference between scenarios and acceptance criteria. In a little bit, we're going to see acceptance criteria when I start iALM.ai. Okay. So, what kind of process am I going to be using to elaborate and derive more details about the user story and then generate acceptance criteria. And by the way, it is the same process to generate scenarios. Okay, so we're going to have AI take a user story, analyze it. The kind of things that I had hard time um, getting people to do, which is how to ask the right questions, we're going to get AI asking the questions. All right. So we'll present the user story to the AI and say, let's do that. Let's find out. In fact, the way the software works is that we ask the AI to generate acceptance criteria or scenarios. And the AI says, I cannot really generate acceptance criteria unless I get more details. So, and it starts asking the questions. We're supposed to take those questions to the product owner or the business analyst who wrote the user story to get them to answer those questions, because actually product owners, business analysts, stakeholders are the only people who can answer questions about the user stories. So we get some answers. And by the way, this is the process you can do manually if you want. The same process I've followed in my workshops. If you're not using AI and if you're using the software iALM.ai, that's fine. You can just follow this process. You can come up with questions as I've been always teaching people. And you get answers from your product owner or business analyst. But guess what? Any answer you hear, I want you to analyze the answer and ask follow up questions. Always the case. It's always the case. If I ask you a question about something, you give me an answer, I might have a follow up questions. Even in real life, not in software. If I ask my wife and say, what time are we going dinner tonight? And she say, I think we can go at 7 o'clock. And then I might have follow-up question. I say, are you going to be ready and finish everything you need to finish before 7 o'clock? You see? Or I may say, how far is the dinner place? And the purpose of my follow-up questions is to clarify the answers. And it is possible that the person who answered the question in the first place may come back and change their answer. I see this all the time in agile discussions. When a good agile team member takes an answer and asks a follow-up question, then the product owner may kind of get a hint and say, okay, now I can see your question. So they change their mind, and that's very healthy and that's very important, and that's what I've been teaching people. You can try to do that, but in this presentation we're going to use AI to do that for us. So asking a follow-up questions, and then you get answers from product owners based on the follow-up questions you ask or the AI asks. And then with all that, you go back and look at all the answers you received, because those answers supposedly they have lots of details, and you build your scenarios. And that's what I tell people to do. Again, one more time, because I found that people are not able to write scenarios or acceptance criteria. I using AI to generate scenarios and or acceptance criteria based on the answers we receive from product owner. And then the last step is uh, we can even estimate user stories. If you're working on an agile project and you're you're using user story as a way of estimating the effort. You know very well agile teams struggle to come up with an accurate uh, story point estimate. And because we have lots of questions and answers from the product owner, and because we have acceptance criteria and or scenarios, AI will be able to give us an accurate uh, story point estimate. But that is the subject. The last bullet is the subject of the webinar that I will be doing um, maybe 2 weeks from now. This whole process is implemented in iALM.ai. That's the AI driven platform. This is not the only thing that iALM.ai does. I just wanted to give you this picture to show you the broad range of functionality. That these are all the kind of things that iALM.ai does, but what we're focusing on really is how to take user stories, use AI to elaborate on those user stories, get a lot of details, get a lot of answers, generate acceptance criteria, and estimate story points. I will have other webinars to cover uh, all the other things we have. Document management, we have issue management, we have test management, test design, the generation of test cases. Like once we take a user story and elaborate on it, we ask AI to generate the test cases. For now, allow me, please. I have about half hour left. Allow me to go and leave the my presentation, because that's all the presentation I have. But I need to show you how this is done, not because I want you uh, to buy iALM.ai, but to clarify what I'm saying, I need to show it to you. So with that being said, let me go here. I'm going to log in as a product owner, project manager. The username I'm using has all these privileges, and I just decided to take a user like that to allow me to do a lot of things in my demos. I'm going to continue here. All right. So I was just working on it before the presentation. So let me go back here. These are my user stories. Everything here on the left. Here is user stories are here. Use cases if you're interested. All the testing stuff is here. Here are all the scenarios, all the formal test cases, the informal or exploratory test cases. All the test sets are here. All the test runs and so on. All the issues. So this all has to do, and all other things here. So let me stick with user stories. And as you can see, user stories can be functional user stories, can be quality user stories, can be anything else you want. Let me expand my functional um, user stories here. And let me grab a user story that I can explain what I'm showing. Here's a user story number one as a ticket counter agent. I want to be able, so let me click on that. Okay. This is not a good one to use because this already have 17 acceptance criteria generated by AI. Let me just click on those and show you it has 26 scenarios because I've used this user story before to show how to create scenarios. So I created 26 scenarios. I created 17 acceptance criteria. If I click here, I can see the 17 acceptance criteria right here. Okay. And each acceptance criteria, it allows me to say, have I tested this or not? And if I tested it, has it passed or failed? Okay. And interestingly enough, the system allows you to create more acceptance criteria manually. So I can, if I look at those acceptance criteria and the team looks at them and feel that AI did not do a very good job, because AI is AI, who, it does not always do a perfect job. If you think it's missing some acceptance criteria, you don't have to rely on everything. You can delete some of those if you don't want to them, and you can add more. Very simple. All right. Scenarios are here. Allow me, please, to show you scenarios only for the purpose of an example. So I'm going to click here to see the 26 scenarios that have been generated. And all of them, if you look at the creator here, it's all created by the AI assistant. Okay, I have 3 pages here. Um, if I want to sort it by scenario number, come on. So here are the scenarios. I'm just gonna open one scenario to show you the details. Again, one more time. I know this presentation is not about scenarios, uh, but since I showed you uh, what scenarios are and how different they are from acceptance criteria, so here are. So here is my scenario. This one, successful boarding pass print. Remember, this user story, as it says here, as a ticket counter agent, I want to be able to print boarding pass for a customer. And the V1 here, that's simply saying this is version 1 of this user story, because iALM.ai allows you to have multiple versions of the same user story. Okay. All right. So that is the scenario here. And here is the scenario description. And here are the risk factors I was talking about. And the AI told me that all of them are high. And because of that, the testing priority calculated based on these 3 numbers, 3 factors, is 9. That the testing priority is always going to be a number between 3 and 9. Why? Because it simply adds up those. Okay, high is 3 and low is 1 and medium is 2. The 3 factors here, all of them are high. The impact of failure, the probability of failure, the frequency of occurrence, all of them are high. So 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9. Very simple. Of course, down here is the test sets that we generate. I have not generated any test sets yet. And here are the steps of the scenario. Also, a lot of details in the scenario that shows, okay, if we were to test this scenario, what steps do we need to follow? They are here, and down here is the formal and informal test cases. We have not generated any test cases yet. If I go back to the scenario list, which I could go from, I go back here to the user story, look at the 26 scenarios, and then I can sort those scenarios by what? By the testing priority. So it brings the scenarios that have a high testing priority at the top. So depending on how much time we have to do testing, we can say, okay, why don't we start with scenarios that are 9, 8, and 7? Let me see if I have any on page 2. No, all page 2 and page 3 seem to be 6 and lower. So we can say, okay, I guess we have here, what, 10, is that 10 scenarios? Yes, 10 scenarios, 9, 8, and 7. So you start actually doing your formal testing for these scenarios. I'm not saying we're going to ignore the other ones, but the other ones, as we're going to see in another presentation, the other ones that are lower priority, if we don't have time to do them formal testing, that's why we have what we call informal testing. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about scenarios here. Let's shift it back to acceptance criteria. Let me go back to user stories. Let me select a different user story. Let me do number 5. Okay, good. Number 5 does not have any scenarios, does not have any acceptance criteria, and of course does not have any formal or informal test cases. So let me go down here to the AI assistant at the bottom here and say generate acceptance criteria. Now, here's the thing. This user story happened to have a description. Let me close this and show you what happens if the user story did not have a description. Okay, so I'm going to go here, cut this out, and save the user story. So now I have a user story that does not have a description. Let me go back to the AI and say, generate acceptance criteria. The response of the AI is going to be different. It said it would not make sense. to generate acceptance criteria for a user story that does not have any description. Give me some description. So I'm going to add the description back. I need to save. All right. I need to go back here, generate acceptance criteria. The response is different now. It says I could generate acceptance criteria if you want me to. However, they will not be complete. And I have the option here to say, it's okay. Go ahead, generate acceptance criteria. And if you want me to do this, I can do that. Okay, here you go. Let me do that. Just see what kind of acceptance criteria we're going to get just based on the description. So what's the other option is get some questions. AI says, I can ask you questions. And if you can get me answers for those questions, then I can give you more acceptance criteria. So let me do that. Now it is generating acceptance criteria. Okay, we understand that they're not going to be complete. Okay, it says I created 7 acceptance criteria just based on what I have, based on the details provided. But it continues to say if you want a complete set of acceptance criteria, either provide more details to the description, because you might go back and say, okay, I think we have more details to add to the description, or allow me to ask clarifying questions. And based on the answer, okay, so let's view generated acceptance criteria here. There are 7. So let me close that and go back here and say, can we be persistent here? Says, give me more acceptance criteria. I already generated acceptance criteria based on the details you give me. Do you want me to generate clarifying questions? I say, yes, go ahead. Now it's going to give me some questions that I need to give to the product owner, the business analyst, anyone who can give me. So how many questions it generated? Oh my God. How many of us can really see this user story, the way it is written, and come up with 18 different questions to ask, so to ask the product owner? See, that's what my experience was. When I put a user story like this in front of uh, people, agile teams, and they say, okay, let's try to understand the user story. Let's ask questions. And I might get one person asking one question, another person asking another question, and so on. But normally I have 15 people, 20 people in my workshop. But what if but when we actually work in projects, we don't have 15 people to look at the same user story, right? We have an agile team that's probably 4 people or 5 people. So in a way, we never can ask enough questions. And if you look at those questions, sure, some of them may not make sense. Remember, this user story is about what? As a ticket counter, I want to be able to add frequent flyer number to a reservation. You remember when you are a frequent flyer and you forgot to put the number when you made the reservation online, then you go to the ticket counter on the day of the travel, and you say, "Oh, can you put my frequent flyer number on my boarding pass?" Why is that? Because you want to get credit, you want to get miles or whatever you get for that. So that's the user story. I'm going to go back here. Okay, here are the questions that were generated. What specific actions define check-in is complete in this context? Because there is something in the user story description that says something like, once you check in, you cannot do whatever. Okay, I can't remember what, but we're not going to go back. So check in. So now a product owner need to answer that. When the customer already clicked the check-in button, something like that. I'm just trying to give an answer. You go back to the product owner and says, okay, is the frequent flyer number linked to a specific frequent flyer program or multiple programs? You can, the product owner may say, it is only one program that belongs to our airlines, something like that. whatever answers you give. Uh, what validation checks should be performed on the frequent flyer number before it gets added to the reservation? Because remember, the frequent flyer number, the customer is going to give it to the agent will add it. So now AI is saying, do you want the system to do anything on the validation? Let's say, make sure the the frequent flyer number belongs to the passenger. Meaning what? Meaning we don't want the system to allow the frequent the agent, the ticket agent, to add just any frequent flyer number. Otherwise, I could go on my reservation. I could go to the ticket counter and say, "Could you add my frequent flyer number?" She says, "What it is?" Then I give her the frequent flyer number of my wife because I don't have a frequent flyer number. So now my wife is getting the credit. Well, no, that's not. That's prohibited by the airlines. So these are the kind of answers. So I'm going to stop here because I'm not going to have time to answer 18 questions. Now I can save, and now I have options. I can generate more follow-up questions if I wanted to. I mean, these are follow-up questions based on what? Based on the answers I provided. Imagine if I choose that and I answered only 3 questions. Or I can generate scenarios if I wanted to based on the answers I've given. I can generate acceptance criteria. Okay. And the nice thing is that I can export this whole list into a PDF that I can send it to my product owner to provide answers to those questions. But better yet, the product owner can log into this platform and can see the same questions and can provide his or her answers to the platform. So I'm going to say, okay, I gave you answers to 3 questions, generate some follow-up questions, just to show you how intelligent the system is to give you follow-up questions based on the answers you provided. Now it's taking a little bit time because it's going through all the questions to see how many of them have been answered. So now look at my answer to question number 1. It gave me how many follow-up questions? Oh gee, 16 follow-up questions. I know you might get overwhelmed and say, when are we going to finish? Well, guess what? You can finish anytime you want. You can ignore the follow-up questions. Don't answer them and just go and say, give me the acceptance criteria, right? I mean, the process is iterative, but it is also keeping you in control. The second question, which I answered, and I simply said, it's only one program. It gave me how many follow-up questions? 16 questions, follow-up questions. Does any of those questions make sense? What happens to your points if the frequent flyer program gets disconnected? Good question. Now, the product owner need to answer this. If the program or the system gets disconnected, you can ignore it, or the product owner can say, I don't see this is happening. Fine. Then that simply means that there is a situation here that AI thinks that it could happen in production, but the product owner says, I don't see this is happening. Then we are leaving this situation up to the chances. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay, how does the frequent flyer program determines their level of status? Like, are they gold? Are they member? It's all stored in the database, whatever. And guess what? After I answer some of the follow-up questions, if I wanted to, I can go and generate more follow-up questions. So as I said, it's an iterative process, but you are in control. Now let's go and create acceptance criteria. Now, because I provided some answers, AI is going to go and generate more acceptance criteria. Now I have 6 more. View them. Those are the acceptance criteria. And of course, the team is still in control, meaning what? Meaning that they can look at those acceptance criteria, and if they think that an acceptance criteria does not make sense, they can delete it. And if they think that there are some acceptance criteria that are missing, they can add more. Very simple. As I said, um, this webinar is going to be recorded. It is being recorded. I will encourage you, however, to go to the iALM website if you're interested. Try it for free. We're giving it for free for up to 10 people for 1 year because we want you to use this in your projects. We don't want to give you 30 days or 60 days. It doesn't make sense. And we don't want to give it to one person because again, there's no agile team that has one person. So we want the whole agile team to use it. We want to use it in a real project. So you have a whole year to use it. And if you're wondering what happens after the year, if you decide to purchase a subscription, we will certainly move your project into your new subscription. All right, I don't want to make this a sales pitch by any means. Thank you so much for being with me today. I hope to see you in the next webinar on using AI to create, to do user story estimates. Thank you.